The year is 2024. In a modest house on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, Jennifer Morrison stared out the window, a captive to the same paranoia that had shadowed her for 3 decades. At 52, her blonde hair was prematurely gray, the sparkle long gone from her blue eyes. The athletic frame of a swimmer had withered, shrunk by years of living in the shadows. For 31 years, Jennifer had been the town's mad woman, the paranoid one, the liar who spun a tale so horrific no one wanted to believe it. That October morning, the phone rang, just like any other call. Jennifer almost didn't answer. Anonymous calls had been part of her life since 1993. But something made her lift the receiver. The voice on the other end identified himself as an FBI special agent. Jennifer nearly hung up, thinking it was another cruel joke, another attempt to make her doubt her own sanity. But the agent said something that paralyzed her. They had found documents in the abandoned basement of the Paraíso Maya Hotel during a demolition. Documents that confirmed every word, every detail, every horror she had testified to 31 years ago. Her hands trembled as the agent read excerpts from the files. Selection sheets with names and descriptions that perfectly matched her 23 missing friends. Trafficking routes to Dubai, Guatemala, Buenos Aires, exactly as she had stated, and then the file that froze her to the bone. Her own. It described her as a valued loss at $50,000 with a handwritten note in the margin, to be eliminated if she reappears. The document was dated March 17, 1993, the day she had escaped by swimming from the yacht, the Sirena. Jennifer fell to her knees on her kitchen floor, the phone still in her hand, and she wept as she had not wept in decades. They were not tears of sadness, but of a vindication so bittersweet it burned her soul. For 31 years she had been dismissed as insane, a fabulist, a traumatized young woman who had invented a narrative to cope with a bad drug trip. And now, when it was too late to save anyone, when her friends had been dead for 3 decades, when her own life had been shattered by the weight of a truth no one would hear, the proof had finally surfaced. The files detailed the entire operation with clinical precision. How they selected victims during spring break, the specific profiles they sought, the international buyers who paid fortunes for young Americans. It was all there in black and white, validating every word of the testimony that both Mexican and American authorities had discredited as psychotic delusion. Jennifer Morrison survived the hell of the yacht, Sirena, and swam 8 kilometers in the open ocean to tell a truth no one wanted to believe. A truth so horrible that authorities preferred to label her insane rather than admit that the Mexican tourist paradise concealed a human trafficking ring that hunted young Americans like cattle, and that she had seen exactly how they operated, who was involved, and why the other 23 would never return. If you have ever doubted a survivor's testimony, her story will make you reconsider. The account she held on to for 3 decades, now finally validated, exposes a darkness the world chose to ignore. Jennifer Morrison was the embodiment of the 90s American dream. Raised in the suburbs of Austin, Texas, she was the perfect daughter of a working-class family. Her father, Tom Morrison, was a plumber, an honest man who had built his small business with his own 2 hands. Her mother, Linda, worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office, dedicating the rest of her time to Jennifer and her younger brother, Kevin. At 21, Jennifer was the pride of the Morrison family. A natural blonde, with that sun-kissed Texas gold in her hair and eyes as blue as the deserts, she stood 5'7", her athletic build honed by years of competitive swimming. She had been captain of her high school swim team, winning multiple state medals in freestyle. Her coach always said she had the endurance of a marathon swimmer, able to hold a steady pace for hours. That skill, which then seemed like just a sporting achievement, would one day save her life. She was a communications major at the University of Texas at Austin, maintaining a 3.8 GPA that kept her on the honor roll every semester. Her professors described her as brilliant and curious, with a natural instinct for asking the right questions. She dreamed of becoming an investigative reporter, inspired by the stories of Woodward and Bernstein she had devoured in her journalism classes. She wanted to expose truths, to give a voice to the voiceless, to change the world one story at a time. The cruelest irony of her life would be to become the very kind of story no one would investigate, the truth no one wanted to expose. The trip to Cancun had been planned for months. Jennifer and her best friend since kindergarten, Sarah Williams, had worked extra shifts at the local Blockbuster all fall semester to save the $800 for the package deal. Sarah was her perfect opposite, a brunette, an extrovert, a theater major with dreams of Broadway. Together they were an inseparable duo who had navigated middle school, high school, and now college. The group that traveled to Cancun that March of 1993 included other classmates. There was Brad Thompson and Mike Rodriguez, both from the football team, handsome in that effortless way of college athletes. There was Jessica and Amanda, Sarah's dorm roommates, and Tommy Chen, the computer science whiz everyone wanted in their study group. In all, 24 young Americans, a perfect snapshot of 90s college youth. Diverse, optimistic, with their entire lives ahead of them. Jennifer's parents almost didn't let her go. Her mother, Linda, had been plagued by nightmares the entire week before the trip. She begged Jennifer to reconsider, to save the money for a used car instead. But Jennifer, with the stubbornness of a 21-year-old, insisted it would be the experience of a lifetime, that all her friends were going, that it was perfectly safe. To calm her mother, she promised to call every night at 9 p.m. without fail. She gave her the hotel number, her flight information, even the name of the tour operator. Linda Morrison kept all of it in a folder she would later use in a desperate attempt to find her daughter. The Paraíso Maya Hotel had lured them in with its premium all-inclusive package, promising a 5-star experience at a 3-star price. Located in one of Cancun's most exclusive areas, the hotel looked like something torn from a postcard. Perfectly aligned palm trees, crystalline pools, and a private white sand beach. The lobby greeted them with welcome drinks and tropical flower leis. Everything seemed designed to create the illusion of paradise on earth. From the moment they checked in, Jennifer noticed something peculiar about the hotel manager, Roberto Villanueva. He was a man of about 45, impeccably dressed in a white linen suit with refined manners that seemed almost rehearsed. But it was his eyes that unsettled Jennifer, the way they seemed to assess each guest as if mentally cataloging them. When he attended to them personally, unusual for a manager of his level, he asked questions that seemed casual, but Jennifer, with her budding journalist's instinct, noticed they were far too specific. Villanueva asked about their majors, their plans after college, their families. When Jennifer mentioned she was studying communications, he pried further. Did she have media contacts? Did her family have political connections? Something in her gut told Jennifer to lie. She said her father was a corporate lawyer at a major Texas firm, that her uncle worked for the State Department. The lies came with a surprising ease. Villanueva seemed to lose a bit of interest in her after that, though he remained excessively polite. The first 2 days passed in a haze of beachside bliss. The group would wake up late, feast at the seemingly endless breakfast buffet, and spend their afternoons by the pool or on the beach. Jennifer and Sarah had hit it off with Brad and Mike on the first day, and an innocent spring break flirtation had begun. Nothing serious, just the thrill of being young, free, and in paradise. The nights were spent at the hotel bar or exploring the clubs along the strip. Jennifer called her mother punctually each night, reassuring her that everything was perfect. On March 15th, their second-to-last full day, Jennifer spent too much time in the sun. Her fair skin was no match for the tropical Mexican heat, and by the afternoon she had a mild case of sunstroke, a headache, nausea, her skin burning despite the sunscreen. Sarah brought her water and convinced her to stay in the air-conditioned room. That was when Roberto Villanueva appeared personally to check on her, another gesture too unusual for a hotel manager. He told them about an exclusive VIP party the following night, March 16th. It would be on a private yacht for select hotel guests only. A premium open bar, an international DJ, a once-in-a-lifetime experience they couldn't miss. Jennifer, feeling ill, initially declined, but Sarah insisted. It would be their last real night in Cancun. They had to go out with a bang. Brad and Mike urged them on, promising to look after them. Villanueva assured them it would be an unforgettable evening, on a yacht belonging to a very respectable friend of his, and that he had personally selected the guests to ensure an exclusive and safe atmosphere. Jennifer would later realize, in her endless, sleepless nights spent replaying every detail, the pattern of his selection. The 24 guests invited to the yacht party all shared specific traits. They were all conventionally attractive. They all came from middle-class families with no real connections to power. They had all provided detailed information about their post-vacation plans. She also noticed who wasn't invited. The less glamorous group of girls from Ohio, the boys whose parents called the hotel constantly. The couple who had mentioned her father was a state senator. By the afternoon of March 16th, Jennifer was feeling better. Rest and hydration had worked their magic. Sarah helped her get ready for the party. They chose summer dresses and comfortable sandals, and Jennifer grabbed a light sweater for the sea breeze. She packed her ID and some cash into a small waterproof pouch she strapped to her wrist. A habit from her swimming days. Sarah teased her for being so cautious. If only she had known how vital that precaution would be. The night of March 16, 1993 began with the palpable excitement of 24 college students preparing for what they believed would be the pinnacle of their vacation. At 8:30 p.m., the group gathered in the lobby of the Paraíso Maya. Roberto Villanueva was waiting for them personally, impeccable as always in his linen suit, wearing a smile Jennifer would later describe as that of a hunter watching his prey walk willingly into a trap. The launches that would take them to the yacht waited at the hotel's private dock. They were sleek, modern boats, their powerful engines cutting through the water with ease. Jennifer sat with Sarah, Brad, and Mike in one of them. Sarah was snapping endless pictures with her disposable camera, capturing moments that would never be developed. Brad had his arm draped casually over Jennifer's shoulders, and she leaned into him, feeling safe, happy, and young. Mike and Sarah were flirting openly, making plans to see each other back in Austin. The journey took about 20 minutes. As they moved away from the coast, the lights of Cancun became a glittering line on the horizon. Then the yacht, the Sirena, appeared, lit up like a beacon in the dark sea. It was a stunning 3-deck vessel, easily over 100 feet long. Colored lights danced across its hull, and electronic music pulsed from its decks, creating the atmosphere of a floating nightclub. As they boarded, they were greeted with champagne and neon-colored cocktails served by waiters in crisp white uniforms. The yacht was even more luxurious inside than it appeared from the water. Polished teak floors, stainless steel railings, white leather furniture, and a bar stocked with every premium liquor imaginable. The main deck had been converted into a dance floor where a professional DJ was mixing the dance hits of the day, but Jennifer, ever the observer, noticed details that didn't fit the exclusive party narrative. There were other guests who weren't from the hotel, older men between 40 and 60 who didn't look like tourists. They wore expensive clothes, but their faces had the hard look of men who had seen too much. There were also very young women, some who looked no older than 18 with empty eyes and mechanical movements, as if they were playing a rehearsed part. The first hour passed without major incident. The college group mostly stuck together, dancing, drinking, and enjoying what truly felt like an exclusive VIP party. Jennifer had limited her alcohol intake because of the previous day's sunstroke, but she accepted a fruit cocktail that a waiter insisted was the house specialty. Sarah, Brad, Mike, and the others drank more freely, swept up in the celebratory mood. Around 10:30 p.m., Jennifer began to feel strangely dizzy. It wasn't the normal feeling of alcohol. She had drunk far more at college parties without this effect. The room seemed to tilt in waves, colors intensified and then faded, and voices sounded distant one moment and too close the next. She saw Sarah swaying, clutching Mike's arm to keep her balance. Brad had slumped heavily onto a sofa, his pupils fully dilated. Other members of their group were showing similar symptoms. The drinks had been drugged. Jennifer knew it with a certainty that cut through the chemical fog in her brain. Her training as a swimmer had taught her to read her body's signals, and this wasn't alcohol. She tried to make her way discreetly to the restroom, hoping she could vomit to purge some of the drug from her system. She locked herself in one of the yacht's luxurious bathrooms and forced her fingers down her throat, but it was too late. Whatever drug they had been given was already coursing through their veins. At 11:45 p.m., the music cut out. The silence was so abrupt, so absolute, that several of the intoxicated youths stumbled and fell. The rhythm that had held them upright suddenly gone. The party lights winked out, replaced by a harsh, clinical white glare. Armed men materialized from multiple points on the yacht. They were not disorganized criminals or makeshift pirates. They moved with military precision, taking up strategic positions, speaking in code over their radios. Jennifer watched Brad try to get to his feet, his football player's instincts kicking in despite the drug. One of the armed men struck him in the head with the butt of his rifle. Brad went down hard, a dead weight, blood already matting his hair. Mike lunged toward him but was stopped by the cold press of a pistol barrel against his forehead. Sarah screamed, a shrill, piercing cry of pure terror that Jennifer would never forget. With practiced efficiency, the captors began to separate the group, women to one side, men to the other. Jennifer was shoved along with the other 11 girls. The 12 young men were herded to another area of the yacht. The older men Jennifer had noticed earlier watched from the shadows, some taking notes in small pads, others speaking quietly into satellite phones. What followed was something Jennifer could only describe years later as an auction of human cattle. The captors systematically evaluated each victim. They checked their teeth like horses, palpated their muscles, and asked specific questions about skills, languages spoken, whether they could cook, or if they had experience with manual labor. Jennifer heard terms she wouldn't fully comprehend until years of therapy had passed. Premium material for the most attractive, trainable for the youngest and most submissive, disposable for those who showed too much fight. 3 girls who resisted actively, kicking and screaming despite the drugs, were immediately pulled aside. Jennifer overheard one of the captors say in Spanish that they were trouble, that they needed to be disposed of that night. The casual tone with which they discussed murdering 3 young women chilled Jennifer's blood more than any direct threat. At 10 a.m. on March 17th, the transfers began. The captors had divided the 24 youths into smaller groups based on criteria Jennifer was forced to witness. She heard discussions of destinations as buyers negotiated for specific lots. A man with a Middle Eastern accent insisted he wanted at least 3 blondes for Dubai. Someone speaking Portuguese with an Argentine accent asked for couples, claiming they sold better as a unit. A Central American buyer wanted only strong men for manual labor in Guatemala. Sarah was assigned to the Dubai group with 2 other girls. As the men came for them, Sarah screamed Jennifer's name, their eyes locking one last time across the chaos. Jennifer wanted to run to her but was paralyzed by the drug and the terror. She watched them drag her best friend toward one of the speedboats. Sarah kept screaming her name until a sharp blow silenced her. Brad, semi-conscious and bleeding, was hauled away with the group destined for Guatemala. Mike was taken with the Buenos Aires lot. Tommy Chen, the computer genius, was singled out. Jennifer heard someone remark that Asians with tech skills were worth triple in certain markets. Every one of her friends, her companions, the people with whom she had shared the last few days of blissful ignorance, were being packaged and shipped like merchandise. Jennifer was assigned to the last transfer group, 5 people bound for a destination she didn't catch. The drug in her system made her appear more docile than she was. Inside, her mind was racing, survival instinct warring against the chemicals. As she waited for her turn, she observed everything she could, memorizing faces, tattoos, scars, any detail that might be useful if she survived. She noticed one of the guards, a young man no older than 25, had moved away from the group to relieve himself over the side of the yacht. His rifle was slung casually over his shoulder, his attention completely diverted. The speedboat assigned to her group was only 10 meters away, its engine idling, ready to depart. Jennifer calculated distances, angles, probabilities. Her swimming experience had taught her to read the water, to understand currents and distances. At 1:45 a.m., as they moved her toward the speedboat with the other 4, Jennifer made the decision that would change her life forever. She feigned a collapse, letting her body go limp. The guard escorting her cursed and bent down to check on her. In that instant, with all the strength she could muster, Jennifer drove her knee into his groin. The man buckled with a choked cry. Jennifer snatched his pistol, but instead of trying to use it, she hurled it into the sea. She knew she stood no chance in a firefight. The confusion lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Jennifer sprinted to the opposite side of the yacht. She heard shouts, orders, the sound of weapons being readied. She didn't look back. She reached the railing and vaulted over. The black water of the Caribbean met her like an icy slap. The gunshots started immediately. She felt the heat of a bullet graze her left shoulder just before she plunged as deep as she could. Underwater, her lungs burning, Jennifer swam away from the yacht. Her training took over. Years of practice had taught her how to maximize every breath, how to move efficiently through the water. When she finally had to surface, she was 50 meters away. Searchlights swept across the water. The shots continued sporadically. She took a breath, dove again, and kept swimming. Jennifer Morrison's survival in the Caribbean waters over the next few hours was a testament to human endurance pushed to its absolute limit. With the drug still in her system, wounded by the bullet and reeling from the psychological trauma of what she had just witnessed, she began the longest journey of her life. 8 kilometers in the open sea at night, hunted by killers, was a death sentence for anyone. But Jennifer was not just anyone. She was a trained swimmer, and more importantly, she was a survivor. The first 2 hours were pure adrenaline. The terror of recapture fueled a pace that would normally be unsustainable. She alternated between breaststroke to conserve energy and front crawl when she needed speed. The yacht's lights grew more distant, but she could still hear the engines of speedboats searching for her. Each time a motor grew louder, she would dive, holding her breath until her lungs felt like they would burst. The drug in her system spawned hallucinations. She saw Sarah swimming beside her, heard Brad's voice telling her to keep going. In one delirious moment, she thought she saw her mother waiting in a boat, only to realize it was a piece of driftwood. The salt stung the wound on her shoulder, a sharp, insistent pain that kept her tethered to consciousness when her mind wanted to drift away. Around 3:00 a.m., exhaustion began its assault. Her highly trained muscles started to cramp. First, her right calf seized, a knot of agony that made her cry out underwater. She had to float on her back for several minutes, massaging the muscle as the waves rocked her. The salt water she accidentally swallowed made her nauseous, and she vomited several times, losing precious fluids she couldn't replace. The water temperature, though warm by ocean standards, began to take its toll. The Caribbean at night hovers around 26 degrees Celsius. But after hours of immersion, hypothermia was setting in. Her fingers were numb, her lips trembled uncontrollably. The light sweater she'd been wearing became a dead weight she had to shed, leaving her in only a summer dress that clung to her body like a second frozen skin. Sometime between 4 and 5 in the morning, Jennifer seriously considered giving up. She was exhausted beyond description. Her arms felt like lead weights she could barely lift. Her legs kicked from pure instinct rather than conscious will. She thought about just stopping, just letting the sea take her. It would be peaceful, she thought, better than what awaited her friends. But then the image of Sarah being dragged onto the boat flashed in her mind. Someone had to survive to tell the story. Someone had to bear witness. Her friends' parents deserved to know the truth. If she died here, all 24 of them would simply vanish without a trace, another statistic of American kids who partied too hard on spring break. The dawn brought new challenges. The light revealed she was utterly alone in a sea that seemed infinite in every direction. There was no sign of land, no ships on the horizon. The currents had carried her in directions she couldn't determine. The rising sun, normally a welcome sight, promised a new hell of dehydration and sunburn. Then came the jellyfish. Aguamala, as the local fishermen called them, small, transparent, and nearly invisible, their touch leaving lines of fire on her skin. Jennifer swam through a bloom of them around 6:00 a.m. The tentacles wrapped around her arms and legs, raising red welts that would burn for weeks. The pain was almost welcome. It kept her conscious, stopping her from passing out and drowning. Sargassum weed tangled around her legs, creating the sensation of hands trying to pull her under. In her delirious state, Jennifer fought it as if it were the captors from the yacht, wasting precious energy to free herself only to become entangled again meters later. Her long hair, once her pride, was now a matted mess of silt and algae that pulled painfully at her scalp. It was around 6:30 a.m. when she saw it, a dark line on the horizon she first dismissed as another hallucination. She blinked several times, shook her head, but the line remained land. Drawing on reserves of energy she didn't know she possessed, she began to swim toward it. Every stroke was agony, her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, her skin was raw from the salt and the stings. The current fought her. For every meter she gained, it seemed to push her back too. She wept with frustration, her tears mixing with the salt of the sea, but she kept going. She hadn't come this far to give up with salvation in sight. She switched to a dog paddle, the most basic and inefficient stroke, but it was the only one her ravaged muscles could maintain. When her feet finally touched sand, she could scarcely believe it. The waves pushed her the last few meters to the beach. She dragged herself from the water like a wounded animal, her legs unable to support her. She crawled perhaps 20 meters across the sand before her body gave out completely, collapsing in a heap as convulsions from exhaustion and hypothermia racked her frame. The fisherman who found her at 7:00 a.m. initially thought she was just another American tourist who had drunk too much and gone for a naked swim. It wasn't uncommon during spring break, but as they got closer and saw her true condition, the story changed. Her skin was tinged blue with hypothermia, cross-hatched with the red welts of jellyfish stings. Dried blood caked her left shoulder where the bullet had grazed her. Her lips were split and bleeding, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She was babbling, a mix of incoherent English and Spanish. She repeated numbers the fishermen didn't understand, boat registrations, descriptions of people. She said names over and over: Sarah, Brad, Mike, Tommy. The fishermen, simple men but not fools, understood that something terrible had happened. They wrapped her in an old blanket from their boat and rushed her to the nearest clinic in Puerto Morelos. For 31 years, her story would be silenced by a corrupt system. But the truth she told in those first hours, the documents eventually found would prove, was the truth she had told all along. When Jennifer Morrison was stable enough to speak coherently. Roughly 48 hours after her rescue, she began to tell a story that the authorities would quickly dismiss as the delirium of a traumatized mind. From her bed at the American hospital in Cancún, her parents holding her trembling hands, Jennifer recounted every detail of the night of March 16th with a precision that should have been taken as proof of its truth, not of madness. She gave full names and detailed physical descriptions of the captors, including specific tattoos and distinctive scars. She recalled registration numbers from the speedboats, fragments of conversations in Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. She described the interior layout of the yacht, the Sirena, in such detail she could have drawn a blueprint. She named Roberto Villanueva specifically. She described his methods of selection. She explained how they had been drugged. The FBI sent agents from Mexico City. They took her testimony for hours, filling dozens of pages with her statements. Jennifer gave them the destinations she had overheard. 3 girls, including Sarah, for Dubai, the strong men, including Brad, for Guatemala, the couples for Buenos Aires. She explained the terms she had heard, how they classified their victims, the prices they mentioned. In parallel, the Mexican police conducted their own investigation, or what would later be revealed as a cover-up. The commander-in-charge, Miguel Herrera, interviewed her repeatedly, but his questions seemed designed more to find inconsistencies than to investigate the crime. He pressed her on minor details, confused her with repetitive questions, and constantly suggested that perhaps she had misunderstood what she had seen. The first cracks in Jennifer's credibility appeared when Mexican authorities declared that no yacht named Sirena was registered in Mexican waters. The Paraíso Maya Hotel produced documents showing that the group of 24 students had checked out early on the morning of March 17th, complete with signatures that allegedly matched each of their own. And Roberto Villanueva had a rock-solid alibi. She had been at a dinner with the municipal president and several prominent businessmen until 2 in the morning. Other hotel guests were interviewed. None recalled any particular party or seeing the group being led away on boats. The hotel staff swore the students had left on their own, for clubs in the hotel zone, and simply never returned. Conveniently, the hotel's security cameras had suffered a technical malfunction that night, leaving no recordings. The most devastating blow to Jennifer's credibility came from Dr. Ricardo Mendez, a forensic psychiatrist hired by the Mexican authorities. After a 3-hour evaluation, he diagnosed Jennifer with substance-induced acute traumatic psychosis. His theory, supported by the trace amounts of drugs found in her system, was that Jennifer had experienced a bad trip on LSD or a similar substance. He claimed she had accidentally fallen from the yacht during a consensual party, and her mind had fabricated an elaborate narrative to cope with survivor's guilt. Dr. Mendez argued it was psychologically impossible for someone to recall so many specific details after being drugged, nearly drowning, and suffering from severe hypothermia. He contended that her detailed memory was evidence of confabulation, not truth. The license plate numbers she remembered, he suggested, were likely random combinations created by her traumatized brain. The FBI, initially more receptive to Jennifer's testimony, began to have doubts when their investigation yielded no corroborating evidence. There were no reports of 23 missing Americans because, according to the hotel's documentation, they had all checked out voluntarily. There was no evidence of human trafficking on the scale Jennifer described. There were no records of international buyers operating in Cancun. The parents of the other 23 students were desperate for answers, but even they began to doubt Jennifer. Some blamed her directly. If there was a dangerous party, why didn't she warn the others? If she escaped, why couldn't she help anyone else? Brad's mother confronted her in the hospital, screaming that her son would never have gone to a party like that Jennifer must be lying or confused. By the end of April 1993, the official narrative was cemented. 23 American students had vanished during spring break, likely drowned in a boating accident or victims of common crime. Jennifer Morrison, the sole survivor, had suffered a trauma so severe that her mind had invented an elaborate human trafficking story to process the loss. Case closed. But Jennifer didn't give up immediately. In 1995, 2 years after the incident, she contacted Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist for the Dallas Morning News known for exposing corruption. She gave him everything: her original notes from the hospital, sketches she'd made of the yacht and the captors, a detailed journal she had kept since the incident, recording every memory as it returned to her. Webb spent 3 months investigating. He found inconsistencies in the official story. Employees of the Paraíso Maya Hotel who had abruptly resigned after March 1993, discrepancies in the checkout records, the fact that Roberto Villanueva had sold all his properties in Mexico and vanished in 1994. He was preparing an explosive expose when he received a call from his editor-in-chief. The message was clear: the story was not to be published. Webb later confessed to Jennifer that the pressure had come from the very top, hinting at connections between governments that didn't want NAFTA trade relations jeopardized by a scandal of this magnitude. Tourism was too vital to the Mexican economy, and the implications of a trafficking ring operating openly in Cancun would be devastating. Jennifer Morrison's life after March 1993 became a daily exercise in psychological survival. She returned to Austin with her parents, but the college town that had once been her home now felt like enemy territory. She couldn't go back to the University of Texas. Every young face reminded her of her missing friends. The lecture halls where she had once dreamed of becoming a journalist now triggered panic attacks. She tried to continue her studies through correspondence courses, but concentration was impossible. She would read the same page a dozen times without retaining a word. Her mind constantly drifted back to the yacht, to Sarah's screams, to the 8 hours in the water. The professors who had once praised her brilliance now received incoherent essays filled with ramblings about hidden truths and corrupt systems. Alcoholism crept in gradually, then all at once. First, it was a glass of wine to sleep without nightmares. Then it was half a bottle. By 1996, Jennifer was drinking from noon until she passed out. It was the only way to silence the voices of her dead friends, to forget for a few hours that no one had believed her. Her parents tried interventions, therapy, rehab. Nothing worked, because the central trauma could never be addressed. How do you process something that officially never happened? Holding a job was impossible. Jennifer found entry-level work in offices, shops, restaurants. But inevitably, something would trigger a flashback. The sound of running water transported her back to the sea. A foreign accent made her hyperventilate. Once, a customer at the bookstore where she worked wore the same cologne as Roberto Villanueva. Jennifer ran to the bathroom and threw up. Then she fled the job and never returned. The surveillance began subtly. A car parked across from her parents' house that never moved. Strange clicks on phone calls. Mail that arrived obviously opened and resealed. When Jennifer tried to report the harassment, the local police looked at her with the same mixture of pity and skepticism she had seen since 1993. The crazy woman who believed in conspiracies. In 1998, the Morrisons moved for the first time, hoping a fresh start in San Antonio would help, but the watchers followed. Jennifer's father, Tom, confronted one of the men in the parked car. The man simply showed him a federal ID and suggested he focus on keeping his daughter stable and quiet. The message was clear. They were being monitored by their own government. Social isolation became total. The few friends Jennifer had kept from high school gradually drifted away. They couldn't relate to her trauma. They didn't understand her paranoia. They grew tired of her theories about what had really happened. Romantic relationships were out of the question. How could she explain the jellyfish scars? How could she justify her terror of the water? How could she trust someone enough to be intimate when she knew powerful forces could make people disappear without consequence? In 2003, during a period of relative stability, Jennifer decided to write it all down in a book. She spent 6 months documenting every detail she remembered, researching patterns of disappearances in tourist areas, compiling circumstantial evidence. She had found other similar cases, groups of young people vanishing in Thailand, Croatia, Brazil, patterns that suggested a global network. One November night, she came home to find her apartment ransacked. Nothing of value was missing except her computer, all her backups, all her physical notes. Even her personal journal from 1993 was gone. On the kitchen table sat a single bullet. She didn't need a note. The message was crystal clear. The parents of the other missing students were another source of pain. Some, like Sarah's mother, believed her and would embrace her when they met in secret. They shared her grief, her frustration with the authorities, her certainty that there had been a cover-up. But others blamed her openly. Mike's father confronted her in a supermarket in 2005, screaming that it was her fault, that she should have done more to save the others, that her survival was a betrayal. In 2008, with a small inheritance from an aunt, Jennifer hired Vincent Torres, a retired FBI private investigator who specialized in cold cases. Torres was skeptical at first, but the consistency of Jennifer's testimony and certain anomalies in the official records intrigued him. He spent 6 months investigating, following leads that had been abandoned for 15 years. Torres uncovered disturbing information. The yacht, the Sirena, had indeed existed, registered to a Panamanian shell company. It had been reported sunk in international waters in September 1994, with no investigation. Roberto Villanueva had died in a car accident in Mexico City in 1995. His vehicle had exploded so completely that barely any remains were left to identify. 7 employees of the Paraíso Maya Hotel who worked in March 1993 had either disappeared or died within the following 2 years, but with no physical evidence, no documents, no living witnesses willing to talk. Torres had to admit defeat. He told Jennifer he believed something horrific had happened, but that whoever orchestrated it had done a masterful job of cleaning up. He warned her to stop digging, that people capable of such a cover-up would not hesitate to silence her permanently. By 2010, Jennifer had accepted her fate. She lived as a recluse in a small Austin apartment, working as a freelance translator of legal documents, a job she could do from home without human interaction. She had no social media, no smartphone, and paid for everything in cash. She was a ghost in her own life, existing but not living. Therapy had been attempted dozens of times, but it was futile. Therapists either believed the official version and tried to convince her that her trauma had created false memories, or they believed her but could do nothing to help. One psychologist told her honestly that her case was unique. How do you treat PTSD when the trauma is denied by every support system that should validate it? The nights were the worst. Jennifer hadn't had a full night's sleep in 30 years. The nightmares were vivid, transporting her back to the yacht, the water, the screams. But worse were the nights she dreamt that everything had been different, that she had managed to save Sarah, that the authorities had believed her, that the guilty had been punished. Waking up to the reality where none of that had happened was a fresh torture every single morning. The morning of October 12, 2024 began like any other for Jennifer Morrison. She woke at 5 o'clock a.m., as always, because sleeping any later only meant more time for nightmares. She made her coffee, checked the locks on her door for the third time, and sat down at her computer to begin her translation work. The phone rang at 8:47 a.m. Jennifer almost didn't answer. Unsolicited calls had been a source of anxiety for 3 decades, but something, perhaps instinct, perhaps just exhaustion from living in fear, made her pick up the receiver. The voice on the other end was professional. She identified herself as Special Agent Rebecca Martinez of the FBI's Cold Case and Human Trafficking Division. The agent's first words were careful, as if she knew she was speaking to someone fragile. She explained that during the demolition of the Paraíso Maya Hotel, which had closed in 2018 and was being torn down to build condominiums, workers had found a hidden safe in what had once been Roberto Villanueva's office. Inside were documents that had survived for 31 years. Jennifer sat down heavily, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The agent continued, her voice growing gentler as she described what they had found. Detailed acquisition files dated from 1990 to 1993. Files with photographs, physical descriptions, and personal information on dozens of young people, not just Americans, but Europeans, Canadians, Australians, and among them the 24 students from March 1993. Agent Martinez read a few excerpts. Sarah Williams, blonde, 5'6", drama student, no significant family connections, valued at $75,000 USD, destined for Dubai, delivered successfully. Brad Thompson, 6'1", athletic, construction experience, valued at $40,000 USD, destined for Guatemala for forced labor. Attempted escape during transport, terminated. Each of the 23 had a similar file, and then there was Jennifer's. Her photo, likely taken without her knowledge at the hotel, her personal information, but with notes added later. Escaped during transfer to secondary yacht. Estimated loss of $50,000 USD. Aquatic search unsuccessful. If she reappears, eliminate immediately. Testimony potentially damaging to the operation. Jennifer wept. Not controlled sobs, but a guttural, primal cry. 3 decades of pain and validation mingling in a torrent that left her trembling on her kitchen floor. Agent Martinez waited patiently, occasionally reassuring her to take her time, that they understood this was overwhelming. There was more. The documents included financial records showing payments to Mexican officials with names and amounts. There was correspondence with international buyers, including details about the destinations of some of the missing. There were photographs of the yacht Sirena, exactly as Jennifer had described it. There was even a logbook from the night of March 16th, mentioning the loss of the Morrison merchandise and orders to tighten security for future acquisition events. Agent Martinez informed her that the FBI was reopening the case as a federal investigation into human trafficking and international conspiracy. Although most of the perpetrators were likely dead or beyond the reach of justice, the official validation of Jennifer's testimony would become part of the public record. The families of the other 23 would be notified of the truth about what happened to their children. Jennifer asked with a trembling voice why it had taken so long, why no one had believed her before. The agent was honest in her reply. In 1993, she admitted, there were forces in both governments that considered a cover-up necessary to protect larger economic interests. NAFTA was in critical negotiations, Mexican tourism was vital, and a scandal of this magnitude would have had geopolitical ramifications. It was easier to discredit a traumatized survivor than to admit systemic failure. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The media, the same outlets that had ignored or ridiculed her for decades, now clamored for her story. Jennifer declined most requests. She didn't want to be a spectacle, not after everything she had endured. But she did give one interview to Marcus Webb, the journalist from the Dallas Morning News who had believed her in 1995. Now retired, Webb cried during the interview, apologizing for not fighting harder to publish her story. The families of the missing had mixed reactions. Some thanked her, finally having closure after 3 decades of agonizing uncertainty. Others were furious with the government for the cover-up. Some still blamed her, irrationally, for having survived when their children did not. Sarah's mother, now 75, traveled from Ohio to embrace her, and together they wept for the brilliant young woman who never got her chance to shine on Broadway. The Mexican government issued a formal, carefully worded apology, conceding failings in the initial investigation without ever admitting active complicity in the cover-up. They offered compensation to the families, a pittance, an insult that most rejected. The Paraíso Maya Hotel, it was revealed, had been owned by a web of shell companies, all connected to international criminal organizations. But for Jennifer, the vindication was bittersweet. Yes, there was finally proof that she had been telling the truth. Yes, the world now knew she wasn't crazy. But that didn't give her back the 3 lost decades. It didn't erase the years of alcoholism, the lost jobs, the relationships never formed, the children she never held. It didn't bring back Sarah. It didn't save Brad. It didn't change the fact that 23 young people had been sold like cattle while she alone escaped. And the danger wasn't over. The recovered documents suggested the trafficking network was far larger than even Jennifer had suspected. Though the original players were dead, their successors were likely still active. Jennifer noticed a renewed surveillance after her story went public. Unfamiliar cars, clicks on her phone, her computer hacked. She installed new locks, security cameras, and adopted a trained protection dog. The truth had freed her from the label of crazy, but it had not brought her peace. Jennifer had sacrificed everything for a truth that nobody wanted to hear. Share this to honor her courage and the memory of the 23 who could not escape. How many more testimonies do we ignore? Comment. We believe survivors. Jennifer Morrison, at 52, has become an unwilling symbol of systemic injustice and human resilience. She survived not only the physical horror of the yacht, Sirena, and the 8-kilometer inferno of the Caribbean Sea, but something arguably worse. 31 years of official discredit, of being called insane, of living with a truth the world refused to accept. The documents from October 2024 proved what she always knew. Roberto Villanueva was not a simple hotel manager, but a linchpin in an international human trafficking network. The Paraíso Maya Hotel was not a family resort, but an elaborate trap for vulnerable young people. Her 23 companions had not disappeared by accident or random crime. They were systematically hunted, catalogued, and sold to the highest bidder. But vindication cannot repair the damage done. Jennifer lives knowing that every word she spoke in 1993 was true, but she also lives with the consequences of not being believed. The PTSD that could have been treated festered into complex trauma. The brilliant young woman with dreams of journalism became a recluse who translates legal documents to avoid human contact. The swimmer who conquered 8 kilometers of open ocean cannot approach a pool without a panic attack. Her message to other survivors is harsh but necessary. Document everything. Make multiple copies, keep them in separate places, and never stop speaking even when they call you crazy, because the truth, Jennifer says, is patient. It might take 31 years. It might cost you everything. But eventually, somehow, it comes to light. Today, Jennifer lives with the duality of her experience. On one hand, the satisfaction of knowing she wasn't crazy, that her testimony was accurate down to the smallest detail. On the other, the bitterness of knowing that the system that enabled the atrocity, the system that silenced her and protected the criminals over the victims, remains essentially intact. The names and faces change, but the structures of power that allow 24 young people to vanish without a trace are still operating. Jennifer Morrison swam 8 kilometers through hell to tell a truth the world was not ready to hear. A truth about 23 young people who were hunted, sold, and vanished while a Mexican tourist paradise looked the other way. And though the documents finally validated every word of her testimony, the 3 decades of forced slints, of being called a madwoman, of living with the weight of being the only one who escaped, those are wounds no vindication can ever truly heal. Jennifer's story is both a warning and a lesson. If you believe survivors deserve to be heard, subscribe now. Next Friday, we will reveal another case where a survivor's testimony was silenced. Turn on all notifications. Comment to support victims who have been ignored. Share with the message, listen to survivors. This is your channel for justice, delayed but necessary. Because sometimes the only evidence that survives is the voice of the one who got away. We'll see you on Friday. And remember, believing victims can be the first step toward justice.